Welcome, welcome. I want to welcome everyone to my TikTok live tonight. Let's get some people on, you all. We're engaged in a serious conversation on this evening. Um, uh, Love should not have to hurt. Breaking the silence on domestic violence. Love shouldn't have to hurt. We're breaking silence on domestic violence. So let me get some people on here. We're going to have an honest, serious dialogue. I think a much needed conversation and something we're not messing around with. For me, that I'm taking personal as we have witnessed several incidents that have occurred in national screens. So you all get somebody on. This is a conversation that we've got to have. This is not the time that I'm gonna ask people to scroll. This is not one of those shows where we're going to be blaming victims or blaming people, but it's a dialogue that we have to have. When love shouldn't have to hurt, breaking the silence on domestic violence. Y'all, we got to have this conversation. So I need y'all to share, like, subscribe, bring someone in to this conversation. I have some questions that we're going to pose, and I want to encourage you all, invite you all um, to pose questions as well that you may have when we get ready to do this. I'm Dr. Gary O. White, and welcome to my TikTok Live. This is the conversation of conversation that we're going to have. Um, a lot of times we're entertaining. Sometimes there'll be things that we do that'll make people laugh. But we have to have some serious conversation about this. Shaka, good to see you on, man. I need to bring you on, man. Let's try to select that button. I'd love to bring you live in and have this conversation with me, brother. So I want to give you a shout out. Glad to see you on. Asha Rocks, y'all get somebody on. Shaka, literally, man, we should be. This is random, brother. You might want to jump on. I'd love to have another clinician, somebody doing this work and having these kind of conversations with people. But you all, this is the TikTok live conversation, YouTube live. For those of you YouTubers that are watching, the conversation here is love shouldn't have to hurt. We're breaking the silence on domestic violence. So I'm going to kind of give folks a little time to get people to log on in. We're going to have this conversation. It's going to be a little uncomfortable for some people. It's a conversation I think we need to have. As the people say in the South, sometimes a hit dog will holler, but that's all right because you all may know someone who's going through this. And that's why I'm inviting you all right now to join on, log in, click someone, tell someone that Dr. Gary O. White, that's me, doing the TikTok live. And the topic is love shouldn't have to hurt, breaking the silence on domestic violence. And so let's get some people on, man. Y'all share someone. I'm going to keep interrupting it throughout the day because I need this conversation. Y'all, we got to, we've got to join this conversation. Shaka, I see that there may be a button. You should have a button on there that will ask that. So take a look at it. But good evening tonight. We're not speaking hypotheticals. We are speaking about real lives lost. That's where we are right now. So this is why I'm saying that we have to have this conversation. We have to go live on today. So you all kind of jump on in. Y'all be brave, be confident, be comfortable in this conversation. Why am I doing this? Because just a few days ago in Virginia, former Lieutenant Governor Justin Fairfax shot and killed his wife, Serena Fairfax, before taking his own life. This occurred during a contentious divorce after he had lost custody and was ordered to leave the home. And unfortunately, their children were the ones who were present and who ended up having to call 911. If that didn't move you, what about in Shreveport, Louisiana? A father, I think his name was Shamir Elkins, he killed 8 children, 7 of his own, in what authorities described as a domestic violence related massacre. We call that familicide. Familicide. This happened amid separation, custody conflict, and reported psychological distress just days before their court proceedings. So you all get someone on. I'm telling you right now, honestly, this is what what prompted me. And you all may have even seen the female, I think her name was Taylor Frankie Paul or something like that, in her domestic violence case, right? This is a TV reality personality who was involved. And the husband, the boyfriend, whatever, recorded the alleged violent altercation. What was painful about this, you all, is that the children were present. So let's get someone on here. We're discussing domestic violence and breaking the silence. That's the topic for today. And that's what's setting the tone. So y'all get someone on. You all share someone, bring someone in. Glad to see you, Joseph. Glad to see you, Michelle. Glad to see you, Kobe. Yvette, glad to have you on. You all, anything you say, remember, you all may be helping someone and you don't even know it. So we'll talk about the signs. We'll talk about, I won't even talk about not just the physical domestic violence, you all. We got to have a conversation about the other form of violence that leaves what I call the silent scars, and that's the emotional violence or emotional abuse. And so we have to really take a look at these cases. And even the three that I just named for you just a moment ago, you all have to understand these are not isolated incidents. They're what I'm calling at this point patterns. Because you'll see really across all the cases, in many other cases that you'll see like this, there's a clear kind of repeated pattern. And this is a thing I want you all to pay attention to. Separation, which is highly lethal, right? That's the high lethality risk. That's what we call it. Control loss, right? Or the escalation when the relationship is coming to an end. These are some signs. Public versus private identity split. Right? These are some of the signs. And what do I mean by that? That means that what the face of the image or what you as a couple, y'all project out to the public. But what's going on and taking place in that house is two separate things. So we call that the private identity split. Mental health violence, mental health and the issue of violence joining. These are some patterns, right? And of course, the most painful, children as victims. So you'll notice something across all of these different people, different cities, and different backgrounds, but the same pattern: control, escalation, and often loss. So you all get someone in. We're going to talk about this because domestic violence is not random, right? This is not like a random drive-by. It follows a script. And tonight I'm breaking that script. Where I'll be talking about those patterns and how they develop and how they escalate and how we have to position ourselves to interrupt them. Good to see you, Kurt. Glad to have you on. So this is an honest discussion and dialogue. Again, I'm Dr. Gary O. White. I'm a professor at Clark Atlanta University and the Clark Atlanta University Whitney and Young Junior School of Social Work. And I've a long time a tenured professor there. But this work around family, relationships, matters of domestic violence, this has really, you all, been much of my life's work. Anyone knows me, or if you go to my YouTube channel, the Dr. Gio White Show, or Instagram, or even check some of the scholars, you'll see my work is around fatherhood and it's around family. So I want to set the tone for why, other than those high profile cases, I want to set the tone of why I really want to have this discussion. And this is a little sobering. So some of these stats, y'all, I want y'all to look them up, right? 1 in 5 homicide victims in the United States are killed by an intimate partner. 1 in 5, right? Over 50% of female homicide victims are killed by a current or former male partner, right? These are just the stats I just want to unpack on you because I don't want you to get caught up on thinking that this is just a matter of those high profile cases. There's a pattern, there's a history, there is an issue that is existing, you all, that we have to be brave enough and comfortable enough to deal with. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, right? Good to see you, Jerry. Glad to have you on. Sean, I'm glad to see you. I want to get everybody in. 10 million people per year are affected by domestic violence. And the FBI, get a load of this, 11,000 plus domestic violent homicides over the last 5 years. and 75% of those domestic violence homicides involved women. And so I know that what I'm talking about is more on an extreme end, but I want to go there. I want us to talk about that and to look at it, but also at the same time, I think that we have to have an honest and critical discussion that domestic violence, you all, it's a public health crisis, not just a criminal issue, and they're strongly linked to trauma exposure, attachment disorders, meaning the relationship has come to an end, the power and control dynamic stuff that we learn. There's something called the Duluth model that really kind of sets the tone for that. So you heard that data. So a question I have for everyone who's watching here, if you all, I'm gonna ask y'all to do me a favor. Does the data surprise you, or does it confirm what you already suspected? It's the first question. You heard the stats. Does these stats surprise you, or does it confirm something that you've already suspected? I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on that. You've heard it, and I want to say this as you all contemplate responding. Ashaka said no, but as a professional, I'm aware of the data. Absolutely. Thank you, Shaka. It doesn't come as a surprise, but even though it's not as a surprise, it's equally as painful and challenging that we hear. If I asked, how many of you, when you were growing up, witnessed domestic violence in the home, in the form of physical or even the form of the emotional abuse growing up, who witnessed that? If you saw it, because a lot of times, these are the prescriptions. When we talk about intergenerational transmission, or that transmission of violence, we're talking about the transmission of how conflicts are handled. We're talking about the transmission of how anger is handled. We're talking about the transmission of how loss and disagreement and conflicts are handled. So this is what kind of sets the tone. And domestic violence, you all, is not just the physical. It's not just the physical. I want to make sure that we all understand that it's the emotional abuse as well that we don't like to talk about. And it's kind of hard in the court to deal with an emotional abuse because there's no scars except for in your thinking. And so I want to bring people on and welcome Shaka. Said I never saw it personally, but looking back, I was aware of the situation, but didn't fully understand it. And I think that was the case for many people, right? But you all, I want to kind of jump in because there's some things before some of y'all get off, and I want to encourage everybody to stay on. But the question, or what I began to contemplate, is when domestic violence is most likely to occur. So someone tell me that. What do you think is most likely to occur at the beginning of a relationship, in the middle of the relationship, at the end of a relationship, during the separation, or after the relationship, right? This is the part that I began to tell people that I want you all to take the notes. And I'm going to answer that because I want to make sure I get all this information into everyone. The most dangerous time, right? The most dangerous time in this is the separation or immediately after leaving. The separation or immediately after leaving. This is the most dangerous time. I run a family violence intervention class. I run that. I'm certified by the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. And I'm going to tell everyone to go to their website, the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. I need you all, the information that they have. I don't care where you are in the country. Go to the Georgia Commission on Family Violence and take a look at just the research, the work, the articles, everything that they do, the resources. Some of those resources I'm going to let you all know about, but that is such one of my favorite resources, the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, and take a look at what they're doing. But our reality, because we're talking about breaking the silence of domestic violence here, because love does not have to hurt. And the first thing I wanted you all to know in the question is, when domestic violence is most likely to occur. And I posed that Was it the beginning, the middle, or the end of the relationship? And I answered that for you. The most dangerous time is the separation or immediately after the relationship. Why? Because this is where the loss of control begins to take place, or the escalation of the violence. And they're triggers, not the causes, but some of those triggers are a divorce filing, right? These big milestones or check marks where the intensity increases. Someone has filed for divorce, or the custody dispute is now kicked in, or in here, the perceived abandonment, right? For some of us, life as you knew it in this relationship has suddenly come to an end. But when we think about someone has filed, someone has positioned themselves for custody, someone feels that there's suddenly been abandoned. This is when these things kick in. Good to see you, Regina. Glad to have you on. Mama Heather, glad to have you on. Tell someone, bring someone on here. But these signs here, the filing, the divorce, custody, the perceived abandonment is critical. Now, if you all get a chance to, you go to my YouTube channel, the Dr. G.O. White Show, because one of the things that I talked about when I'm listening to people who deal with issues of divorce and their anger, y'all, guess what? What you do to someone can far outweigh all the things that you've done for them. Good to see you, Ronan. Glad to have you on. Brandon, glad to have you on. Regina C, glad to have you on. You all, I'm glad you all have joined in here. Y'all write that down. Keep that in mind. This first one, sort of like, if I will, sort of like the clinical explanation that I'm focusing on when when the violence is most likely to occur at this level here. And I said it's immediately following. And I gave you all the divorce, the custody, the feeling of abandonment, and the language a lot of times sometimes tend to the same. But hear what I'm saying, you all. What you do to someone can discount all the things that you've done for them. In that language, a lot of times I've heard it from men and women, all the shit that I've done for them, and they don't appreciate nothing. And you're going on and on again about all the things you've done for someone, but you don't want to have a conversation about the things that you've done to them. So y'all chew on that. For those of you who that becomes part of your theme, I want you to balance what you do for someone and what you do to someone. I want you to balance those things. But this escalation in this moment in the world of attachment theory, that looks at what we call the anxious avoidance. Individuals may react, these people, to control or loss of control, and some of that aggression begins to kick in. The violence increases when control is threatened. So the loss of control is threatened, and that might be how the relationship existed, the marriage, the comforts that you have enjoyed. So what looks like a messy breakup is actually a high risk lethal lethality window that we're looking at. Let me say that again. When we talk about this most critical time, what looks like a messy breakup, y'all talk about it. Ooh, damn, that's a messy ass breakup. But it's often a high risk lethality window. That's the window during the separation, as the divorce begins to come to an end. That's when it's most dangerous. That's when the violence, and it may not be to the level of suicide or murder, suicide, or homicide, but it's at that point where the language, good to see you, Coco, that's when the language at that point becomes of its highest. And so that's why I bring that to you all's attention. And so that separation of that period of time is the first point that I want to raise. So the question is, what are some of the other things you all think that contribute to domestic violence? Maybe not to the level, again, you all, I know I started with the murder suicides, and that's a reality, but I'm talking about also the everyday violence that we may very well see. And so I'm asking, what do you all think some of the contributing factors? What leads up to it, right? what are some of the things that we see that may be some of the causes of the domestic violence? And as you contemplate it, I'm going to give you all some, and hopefully someone to jump in and you can share some of what you might believe to be some of the causes. But I'm going to tell you power and control orientation, right? That means that you entered that relationship and see, this is why I love my brother Shock. He jumped on. I said power control orientation, and he said power and control dynamics. Absolutely. One of the contributing factors is right there. Childhood, believe it or not, you all, childhood exposure to violence is also a contributor. Now, y'all be careful in what I'm saying because I want to make a clear distinction between what I'm calling a contributing factor and a causal factor. I ain't talked about causes, right? Because causal factors, we're gonna get to that, and I'm gonna cut all that short very quick because that's your individual decision. So we'll work through that. But power and control as a dynamic is certainly one of them. But the childhood exposure to violence, and we see that, and I'm going to tell you in 95% of the cases, and I'm sure right now there are people who run anger management and domestic violence and cases. I'm sure there's some therapists on here as well, and they will tell you we have to always kind of look. It's the psychoanalytic thing where we have to go and kind of examine what was going on in your childhood. Shaka said often the perpetrators are not acting from known insecurities, but maladaptive behaviors, right? This is maladaptive behaviors. This is how they were oriented. This is what they learned. This is how they learn how to deal with the conflict. So it's connected to the childhood exposure to violence, the maladaptive piece. That's what we began to see. Another contributor to family violence is substance abuse. Now, this is a disinhibitor. It is not a root cause. And so this is one of those things when we're talking about contributing factors. So someone says, well, I was drunk, right? The violence, or I've even heard victims say he's only that way or she's only that way when the person is drunk. So it's a contributing factor, but it's not a root cause. Some other contributing factors, and I'd love to hear from you all, but economic stress, right? The masculinity threat for men. A man loses his job. Let me show y'all how the stress increases in a home. A man loses his job. And if that job is tied to your identity, then you've lost your identity. And when your job and who you are is tied to what you do, and then suddenly what you do is no longer in existence, and then you have what I'm calling identity confusion, right? You have this great job with this great income, and you lost it. Now you have no identity, and I'm saying this is a contributing factor that we have to understand. Shaka also added poor emotional regulation. We're going to talk about emotional intelligence and emotional regulation, and insecurities are also risk factors. Alcohol and drug abuse, and what Shaka's highlighting here is how some people use to cope. That's why we call it a disinhibitor. Jealousy and abandonment and fear are other contributing factors that we see that prompts us to have this honest dialogue. And of course, what contributes to domestic violence, murder, suicide is access to firearms. The majority of those lethal cases involved a firearm. So, for example, that is why it makes sense then when people, at least in the state of Georgia, but I think in California, everywhere else, that people who are required to attend the intimate partner violence or batterers intervention or family violence classes, you'll see part of that agreement is that you have to give up your firearm. They're not just, this is not about taking your rights, but it's about that being one of the major factors that associated with domestic violence. And so when someone is court ordered or before court and they are in a domestic violence related situation, they know what the common contributors are of that. And so we see some of these issues when these contributing factors in its intensity, intermittent explosive disorders. We've seen what they call anti-personality disorders and even borderline personality traits, right? The fear of abandonment becomes some of the issues that we see. And so this is why we have to have this conversation. We focus on our childhood. We focus on what we've seen, what we've been surrounded with in terms of how people deal with conflicts. So then violence is learned and normalized, right? So in your circles, now all of a sudden, this is what you've seen growing up. Some people may even say that this is what all I saw in my community or in my family, right? But stress, and to a point that Shaka made here, when you look at stress and the inability to cope equals aggression. So again, that whole social learning theory says violence is learned and normalized, and this general strain theory. Y'all, I'm dropping some theories on y'all because I need y'all to write them down to begin to make sense of it. But that is stress plus the inability to cope equals the aggression. And then what follows is a little bit more frightening. So how many of us were taught about healthy conflict, right? It's a good question. When you were growing up, how many of you were taught about healthy conflict resolution while you were growing up? Did you see it in your home, right? Did you see it growing up? This is one of the interesting things, you all. In one of my groups, I asked a group of men, when you were growing up, did you see the men in your family apologize? Did you see them literally take ownership? Now, apologizing and accountability, I'm going to be very clear on this piece here, you all. Apologizing and accountability are two separate things. Randy No Sauce Barbecue, good to see you. These are literally, you all, two separate things, right? Be apologizing, but accountability says that you're also acknowledging the behavior that you were engaged in. Shaka said, I was made aware of, but not taught. By this, I mean healthy was anti-violent, not actual healthy. So a good point that Shaka's making there is anti-violence was how it was defined, right? I'm not violent, so therefore. But that's the disruption we got to break there, because when we think about the emotional abuse, and you all, that's just how we talk to them, bitch. And the downplay that begins to attack people's self-worth or their value, that's where it becomes critical. But we pause here and we're asking, how many of you were taught healthy conflict resolution when you were growing up? And did you see it? That's what I want to pose. Not only were you taught it, but did you see it in your own home? Did you see it among your friends? But I want y'all to also focus on how did you see your friends' parents disagree in public? You know, these are some big, important questions around this that we have to dialogue. So y'all get someone on. I'm Dr. Gary O. White, and this is my TikTok live. But all of this, you'll see it in more detail on my podcast, The Dr. G. O. White Show, that we have to really engage in this conversation. Now, I want to switch a little bit here, and I want to just kind of talk about some signs that you may be in a potential, or you may find yourself in a domestic violence relationship, right? And we have to kind of home in on some of these, right? So emotional abuse, we expand this because there are people, before we talk about these signs, I want to be very clear. There are people who believe I never put my hands on a person, so therefore I'm not abusive. Let me say that again. It's a concept that is all wrong. I look, man, I ain't never put my hands on a woman. I'm almost amazed whenever I hear, particularly a man, make a declarative statement like that. I ain't never put my hands on a woman, right? So what he's saying is that he's awarding himself because he's believing that therefore, because he's never put his hands on a woman, he's never been abusive. That's the part that Shaka Barrett, great therapist, is getting at here. You can be emotionally abusive. The gaslighting part. We call that the cognitive. I'm gonna call it is cognitive destabilization. You are the way you are communicating with them, the way you are, even to some degree, making people believe when you know they're wrong, but you got a great way of words and you have a great way of kind of twisting and shaking things up and mixing things up. We highlight, we began to, you might be in one of these kind of domestic violence relationships, or the signs that you're in that type of culture, or that could very well be the culture of your relationship, because this is an intervention conversation and a prevention conversation at the same time. Consistent criticism, displeasure is what I saw growing up. Thank you. And what Shaka just highlighted there is what he saw growing up. What else did some of you all see growing in the home? I definitely want to get to your discussions around that, but some of the signs that you may be in that type of culture. Isolation. This is one of the very interesting things. This is what they call dependency creation, right? So this isolation, what does it show up, y'all? I want y'all to hear the language, right? So you can begin. I don't want you to be isolated, find yourself in an isolating situation because you missed the signs. Right. So here's some common conversation. How come every time we get into a goddamn argument, you got to call your mom and you got to call your sister? Why don't you keep people out of our business? Now, on the outside, that makes sense. But I'm going to tell you, when it comes to violence, it's family business. It's not what used to be how the law would treat family violence as a family matter. But guess what? In the Black community, that's the extended family matter. So we hear that language and it becomes problematic. But the isolation is one of the signs that you may be headed to or find yourself in that type of a relationship, right? In financial control, right? I call that structural entrapment. I don't have an issue. If anything she wants, all she got to do is ask me. All she got to do is ask me for it, and I give it to her, right? So I've never told her anything that she's ever wanted. I told her she can have it, right? And so when you hear language like that, then this is when it gets a little tricky, because if you hear what I just said, anything she wants, all she got to do is ask. I'm not tripping. I've never had, y'all listen to the language. This is the financial control. I've never had an issue, right? Someone's making a strong declarative statement. I've never had an issue. Anything she's ever wanted, I gave it to her. So then people began to take that strong comment. I'm looking at some of these other comments that people may have here. So we're looking at these pieces here, but that financial isolation. You enter a relationship, and before you realize it, that you are literally dependent on that person. Now, people who use power and control, here's the interesting thing. That's part of what begins to happen, and that's kind of connected you all to some of the old school thinking, right? And so here's a caution that I offer up to, offer up to some of you women who say that, I want a man and he gonna pay the bills and he gonna have a job and I shouldn't have to work, right? So these 1950s type of concepts that people literally bring into relationships, and you take that very strong stance, and guess what? I celebrate you, but at that same time, I have to pause, and for the moment, just make sure that you don't find yourself in an emotionally abusive relationship. And that's real talk. So that's where we pay attention to some of these what I'm calling contributors to the family violence. Also, another characteristic is monitoring, right? The surveillance-based control. So now the things you all I'm talking right now, I'm not even talking about anybody putting their hands on anybody right now. Just pay attention to what I just said. This is not a conversation about putting hands on anyone right now. We're right now in this moment just talking about, we're looking at signs, but in this moment, I'm offering up to you all some of the other signs or contributing factors, and you may not even see it because of how subtle it is. And so the behavior escalation and conflicts, when we see people in this, I need y'all to pay attention. And these are some things I just need you all to pay attention to with regard to how conflicts occur. The tension builds up, right? And so there's a conflict, then the incident occurs, and then immediately after, this is how that cycle works. And then immediately after the incident where the person blows up, the person may say, in the midst of that anger and that hatred, the most painful things. I'm going to tell you all that the tongue is more powerful than the gun. Let me say that. The tongue is more powerful than the gun in many ways. There are things that someone can say, that there are things that y'all might remember from your childhood that follows you all the way up into your adulthood. But that piece here around the monitoring, you're on point again, Dr. Baird. The tracking location for safety when it's really about control. Well, baby, share your location. I can't even find you, right? And men and women do this. Now, this here, that tracking part, you all, is not in of itself an issue, right? My family, my whole family, even my adult children, we're all on Life 360. So that's not an issue or an issue at that level, but when you are using tracking as a form of monitoring or controlling, then we're in something else. So this is why that it becomes important that we pay attention to some of these matters. Shaka, once again, man, I'm telling you, got to come on, right? Strategic verbal abuse, right? Hitting you hard with intention, right? That's saying some things when we get, some of us around the emotional abuse side, we can become so upset and we can say the most hurtful things. But here's the tricky question I once asked a client. He said, when you called her a bitch, and I'm like, well, why? He said, man, I was just angry and I was upset. And I'm like, okay, I know you were upset, but I'm trying to figure out why did you call her a bitch? No, I just told you, man, I just was upset and I went off the top. And I'm like, yes, I know you were upset, and I know you went off your over the top. But why did you choose that specific word? Why did you choose calling her a bitch? Why? So sometimes you all, in our emotional height around that gaslighting, we will find ourselves saying things that we know that are damaging and can have a long-lasting effect. So some of these things that we're looking at, and I'm sharing with you all on signs that you may be in a domestic violence relationship, and we see it, how you respond. You begin to become numb and normalize it. And here's what I need you all to understand. Some of you may find yourselves in what we call trauma bonding, right? That intermittent reinforcement of the strength of the attachment. Baby, I'm sorry. I apologize, right? And y'all think about it, man. Some of the greatest songs, if you really kind of think about it, can be heavy. Y'all know the OJs. He said, and we cried, and we cried, and we cried together, and then we made love. We made love like we never made love before, right? We began to look at Al Green said, why some people break up and turn around and make up. I just can't understand it, right? So we see it. It's even in our love songs. Sometimes we'll see these reoccurring cycles that began to take place. And so we pay attention because these are some signs that I want to bring to your attention that you may find yourself very well in a domestic violence relationship. So this is a call for us to be honest and authentic with ourselves, right? So if you see yourself in the isolation, you find yourself being dependent on someone, the financial control, again, you're no longer involved with your friends. You're no longer going out Reasonably so. There's a difference between being married and in a relationship. But if you're married, you have to sneak and call your friends. Your spouse has issues every time you're talking to your boys or you're talking to your girls. The isolation, they don't, and the biggest one, they don't want you around their family or they got issues. This is where you need to stop and have a conversation about it, because the isolation, you all, is one of the early signs that you might be moving into that type of relationship. And if you are in an isolated state, this is where you begin to have that conversation, because you have to, some of us, the research shows that a person in a domestic violence relationship, they may leave up to 11 times before they're finally gone. So let me tell you what happens. But in that 11 times, the family becomes exhausted from running to your rescue. And what ends up happening, how the isolation gets locked in and sealed in, is because sometimes your family done ran to your rescue so many times, they just throw their hands up. And so just kind of understanding how family may feel. But guess what? Throwing their hands up, they still care. What happens is that they reach a point where they feel powerless. But again, it says that someone might leave up to 11 times before they're finally gone. So what I'm telling you, I don't care how many times you've got to do it. If you're in that type of relationship, I think it's very critical that we have to kind of hone in on that. Now, on the other hand of that, because the majority of the people who commit the violence are men, I want to kind of focus in on the brothers for a second here, right? And I got a question, right? Here's your self-assessment. Right? Do you equate control with love? Do you equate this notion of I'm a man of the house? I love that. You know what? Let's just stop for a second. Let's deconstruct a few things. What does it mean to be the man of the house? I want to pause. I hope someone can jump in and respond to that, because that's a very curious question. What does it mean to be the man of the house, right? Because if there's a man of the house, there must be a woman of the house, right? If being man of the house means the power and control, then we have some concerns there, right? Do you escalate when you feel rejected, right? These are the questions that might suggest that you might be borderline or have the propensity of being a violent person. Do you escalate when you feel rejected? And do you externalize blame? Now, that one is, I have a podcast and I talk about there's a right way and a wrong way to be wrong. There's a right way and a wrong way to be wrong. And the right way to be wrong is to accept accountability and take ownership and not attach it to something, right? Don't hijack it. What do I mean by that? I know I was wrong, but if you hadn't done this, then I wouldn't have done that. That's the wrong way to be wrong. The right way to be wrong is to take accountability and accept it. And so when I asked about what does it mean to be the man of the house, Shaka said a protector and a provider, and creates a safe space for the partner and a degree of softness. I love that. You all, my saying, y'all gonna see it on some of my merchandise coming up. And I believe this, that men bring peace to the house, the woman will convert the house into a home. Right? So that's my formula, theoretically speaking. If the man brings peace to the house, she'll convert the house to the home. That's not to say that a man can't convert a house to a home. And that's not to say that a woman can't bring peace to the house. But I'm saying in this linear piece, brothers, if you bring the peace to the house and that happiness to the house, she'll convert that house to a home. But this piece here, for some of us who may find ourselves in that category of being abusive and may not realize it, right? The cognitive distortion, because you don't own shit. So the cognitive distortion means that when you've done something wrong, when you're violent, then your immediate response is, you made me do it. Right? No, I wouldn't have put my hands on you if you had not done. Right? So we call that a cognitive distortion, because you're literally saying, if this person had not done that, then you would not have been violent. No, you chose to be violent. Right? We see part of this piece here when we do see that violence is the entitlement belief. right? Let me tell you what the entitlement belief is. The entitlement belief is, well, because I'm the goddamn man of the house, and that's the reason why. Oh, did y'all hear that? Right? So you have to unpack. I'm the man of the house because I'm the man. I say so. So now, when you begin to use that type of language where you're in disagreement, you're in conflict, and the answer is because you're the man of the house, right? That's the entitlement belief. And then emotional dysregulation. Brothers, I'm going to tell you, I think a lot of us, we are numerically speaking, we're men, but emotionally speaking, some of us are whatever that age that we were traumatized as children. So some of y'all might be numerically a man, but emotionally a 15-year-old. I know. Right about now, somebody said, "Damn, Dr. White, you going in on the men." I know, but that's only I'm speaking only because of what we have in front of us in terms of the violence. Now, I do want to pose this question here. Do y'all remember? Was it 2014? I can't remember. Do y'all remember Ray Rice? Remember the football player? I think it was Baltimore Ravens, and we saw on the video. Y'all remember this? Remember you saw on the video kind of him. It was his girlfriend. Later on, they both tried to apologize, but his career was done by that time. But he beat her up in the elevator. Now, here's a question that I have for you, brothers. Imagine if you were sitting at home watching TV, just having a good time. They do the breaking news, and they show a violent act. And you hone in and you zoom in on the camera, you take a look, and the woman that just got knocked out was your daughter. Or the woman that just got knocked out was your mother. What would you do? What would you say? And how would you feel? Right? If you honed in and you looked on that camera, right? Remove Ray Rice, whoever it is, but the victim in that got knocked out, if you zoomed in and that was your daughter or your mother, what would you say? How would you feel? And what would you do? That becomes a very important piece. Yes, I know a lot of defense attorneys, but it depends on what type of defense attorney it is, Shaka. I'm going to send everybody to some of my favorite criminal law attorneys, just on a side note, because that question got asked, right? So you might, the Bodie Law Group, Attorney William Bodie, one of the baddest defense attorneys on the planet. Also, the Davis Bozeman Law Firm, and that we highlight. And Durante Partridge, for those of you who are watching, Durante Partridge, if anybody had a chance to go to letusmakeman.net, go to letusmakeman.net, you're going to see a whole host of some of the most powerful attorneys there. So Randy No Sauce Barbecue says that person would get regret what they did. He's responding to the question. If you zoomed in and it was your daughter, what would you say? What would you do? How would you feel? Randy said, to be honest with you, I actually would want to talk to my daughter or my mother to figure it out. I applaud you. I can't imagine you are probably part of a small group of men who would want to kind of have a conversation with them to figure it out. But the initial emotional reaction, if you zoomed in and you saw that the person knocked out on that elevator was your daughter or your mother, the initial one, well, here's what many men say: man, it's on, it's crime, it's violence, right? They'll everything, every description has a homicidal oriented or physically violent oriented response. But here's the next question to the Ray Rice scenario. You hone in on the elevator, you see that your daughter knocked out, and then you call the guy. What happens if you call the guy and he says, with all due respect, Mr. whoever it is, this between me and your daughter, she a grown woman, you can stay where you at. So Randy No Sauce, you talk to the guy and he tells you, with all due respect, your daughter or your granddaughter is a grown woman, this between me and her. Then what would you do? What would you say? How would you feel? Y'all out of elevated to another level. So you done watched your daughter get knocked out in the elevator. You done called to talk to the guy who done knocked your daughter out on the elevator. And he just told you that, with all due respect, he said, this is between me and your daughter. Now, Randy No Sauce, what would you do? What would you say? How would you feel? Right? Randy said, I would not call him on the phone. I would show up in person. Okay, Randy, you there? And he says to you, with all due respect, this between me and your daughter, your granddaughter, right? And so you can go back where you are, right? I only feel that it's right for him to get to say it before his knees and legs are broken. That right? So this is what begins to happen, right? Keep up says, because I got your bail money. Right? So y'all think about it. He done told you. So keep up. He done told you, with all due respect, this between me and your daughter, man. You can go back home. You know, what would you do? What would you say? How would you feel? Right? So y'all chew on that. I need to hear y'all respond. I might have to hold this thing on for a few seconds here, because we're looking now, right? Keep up and said, it's a long time. Oh, keep up. What would you do, man? What would you say? How would you feel? What really matters is, Randy says, what really matters is if it is his wife, it's a difference between a wife and a girlfriend. So I don't know what you mean, Randy. I think, are you saying that if it was his wife, you would respond one way, versus if your daughter was his wife, you would respond one way, but if your daughter it was his girlfriend, you would have a different response? You might be operating on a whole different level than some other viewers on here. But this is a good discussion and dialogue there, right? That's well, it's an interesting piece. But if it's your mom and it's your daughter, and you're saying that your behavior or how you would respond would be different if it were your wife or if it was your mother, I find that to be a bit challenging. But what about this? All right, let's switch it up a little bit, right? For those of you who are watching, y'all, we're talking about love doesn't have to hurt, breaking the silence of domestic violence, right? So what happens if you stop the tape and you zoom in a little bit more? And this time, it's not your daughter being knocked out, but it's your son who knocked the woman out. Now, gentlemen, what would you do? What would you say? How would you feel that if you looked in on the tape and it was your son who had knocked out the woman? And a moment ago, I said it was your daughter was the victim or your mother, but now it's your son. You watched your son knock the woman out. What would you do? What would you say? How would you feel? So I can't wait to see some of y'all responses there. Couple things as I wait for y'all responses. I need y'all to know that domestic violence, a lot of it, most of it, all of it, is about power and control. It's not about a matter of anger. It's about emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming. Power and control can show up in the form of using the children or the economic abuse. These are a lot of the things, you all, that we've talked about. We have the same conversation, and he will. So now Shaka has said, Randy, here Shaka said he having the same conversation with his son, right? And Shaka said, and he's ready to deal with the consequences. With the son as well. So anybody who's watching this here, welcome. I'm Dr. Gary O. White. This is Dr. G.O. White Show. And the topic that we've been engaged in was since 6:30. I said, love does not have to hurt. Breaking the cycle and the silence of domestic violence. Sonia, good to see you on here. Glad to have you here, sis. And so the question that we pose there is that if you were watching, this is related to the Ray Rice scenario. If you were watching the TV screen, you stopped the elevator, you saw a man knock out a woman, you zoom in on the tape, and the young man that you just saw that knocked that woman out on the elevator was your son. What would you do? What would you say? How would you feel? Right? Keep Up said, I will sit down with him and ask him to turn yourself in, or do I need to call the police? So Keep Up, it's a good conversation. And you all, I like that Keep Up, because that's a real conversation and a dialogue. Brothers, it's one thing to see your daughter. So, but y'all think about this. When it's your daughter, you got homicidal, physical ideations. But when the perpetrator in that type of scenario is your son, y'all, it's a hard one. Keep Up. I applaud you on that, because you got to have that conversation. Y'all saw that YouTube video where the guy and the girl's sitting in the front seat, and he pretend like he hits her, and then he said, "Man, I love you. You my man, but you going to jail." Right? And that's reality. Sonia says there's no excuses, none. So that's what you say. But how would you feel? Right? Right. So it's a little easier to manage what we would say, but how would we feel if it was our son that we saw just knock a woman out on the elevator? Right? That becomes a hard piece there. So a couple things I think that we have to hone in on here. Um, just some of the issues around power and control. Uh, the power and control and how that piece kind of shows up. And I'm going to tell you all, you might be in that type of relationship if you find yourself on eggshells all the time. Randy said that if it was his son that he saw that knocked the woman out, Randy took the position that he would be hurt as well, and he would have to have that conversation as well. You all, there's so much to cover in my hour. I want to make sure as I leave here, you all, childhood trauma and the generational transmission of violence. I got 4 minutes that I'm going to y'all, so I'm going to run y'all through this. That exposure to violence increases the likelihood of victimization or perpetration. So we know that when our children are seeing this and it becomes normalized in our homes, it is an increased likelihood of victimization or perpetration. That's the transmission of violence from one generation to the other. So there's something called adverse childhood experiences, or the ACEs, is what we began to see. But the intergenerational trauma, you all, is what we've seen. This is where the emotional dysregulation comes from, where young people who become adults who never learn how to manage their emotions or deal with conflicts. What is normalized in childhood becomes repeated in adulthood unless it is interrupted, right? And so these become some important people. So men can and are victims as well. I want to make sure I don't leave this, all right? But the majority of the cases, the perpetrator are women, because the women tend to disproportionately experience that. So just a couple last things. What I want you to do, the actions and next steps. If you're experiencing violence, here's what I'm asking you all to do. Develop a safety plan. Involve your best friend in that safety plan. Identify an exit strategy. You got to let somebody know. And for those of you who have a friend, I need y'all to just listen. Do not say, "If that were me." Secure documents and finances. I'm going to tell you right now, if you got a good friend that's close enough that you can have them hold on to one of your cards, then please do that. Keep the clothes in the car. Keep some clothes at a friend's house. Contact your support systems. If you know someone, listen without judgment, y'all. Avoid just leave advice, because that never worked, and support the autonomy. But if you feel you may be abusive, I need y'all to get into therapy. Holler at me. Address the control and belief. Y'all in your circle, you need to check your friends. You need to check your boys in your circle. But until then, couple things I need you all to do. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-7233. That's 1-800-799-7233. All right, the hotline.org, right? Or you can text START, START, to 88788, right? Or, of course, call 911. So why do people stay? Why do people make leaving dangerous? What did you learn about growing up? Can we control it? I'm going to tell you tonight. We talked about the pain. We talked about the patterns. We talked about domestic violence is not random. We talked about it, acknowledging that it is predictable. It is preventable. The tragedy, the tragedy is not just about people and dying. It's about the warning signs that have often been there all along. So tonight, I leave you with this. Love should never require you to shrink, suffer, or survive. And if you are serious, if we're serious, if we are serious about saving lives, we must be just as serious about confronting the truth. So break the silence, break the cycle, choose the healing, learn to listen, be honest. And y'all, I'm going to tell you to be authentic with your friends. I think it is perhaps one of the most important things that we can do in our lives. So I'm going to close by saying, yes, he might leave several times. Yes, she may leave several times. And I'm going to talk you family members, if you have someone doing it, I'm going to say to you all, every time she knocks on that door, every time he knocks on that door, open it. Because we don't know if it's their first, if it's their fifth, and we'll never know if it's their last time. But what we do know is that when they come to you, please be prepared to receive them. And to my friends, to my boys, to your friends, to your boys, if y'all know someone like that, you got to check them. If you don't, no one will. That's the purpose of the circles. I'm Dr. Gary O. White, and this is the Dr. G. O. White Show. Y'all take care. Woo, powerful, powerful, powerful. Thank you all very much on YouTube. You've been logged in and paying attention. Hopefully something I said here triggered some thoughts. Y'all tell someone to go to the Dr. G. O. White Show on TikTok, YouTube, or Instagram. On my YouTube channel, you all, I got so many important topics that I need you to share with your families, share with your friends, and you all reach out. So be sure to like, subscribe, and share. I'm Dr. Gary White. Until next Tuesday, I see y'all then. Take care.